So welcome everyone to today's ConnexUs Thursday talk. Today we're talking about building and sustaining online communities of practice, a topic that was important before the pandemic and just became more and more so as we were getting our speakers ready. We were just talking about, how do we adapt to changing technologies? How do we make our communities of practice more inclusive, accessible from different parts of the world with different amounts of online activity, things like that. We'll let our speakers get into that. Because we have so many great speakers, I won't do full intros. I'll put the link to their speaker bios in the chat now, but we're very excited to have Bev and Etienne, Annika, Fiorella, and Anya. So Bev and Etienne, I'll hand the floor over to you to get started, and thank you for being here.
So yes, Etienne and Bev Wenger trainer in Sesimbra in Portugal, and we are learning theorists and consultants often associated with communities of practice. And I should say right up front that really, who cares about communities of practice, right? Probably not us, actually. What we really care about is learning capability, developing people's learning capability, individuals, projects, organizations, us as a species, because that's how we survive, is by learning. So what really we're doing is developing learning capability, and communities of practice are one way of developing learning capability of a system or of a group. And so it's only in that case that we care about communities of practice. So of course we can't talk about communities of practice without talking about learning and what we mean by learning.
And what you mean really by social learning. And so if you think of learning, we can think of two opposite models of learning. You have the first black box there, the cognitive view, where learning is a transmission of certainty. There is a lecturer in the lecture hall. They have a certain level of certainty about a topic. And what they want is to transmit that certainty to learners who are sitting in the hall and in a lecture hall, and who will absorb that certainty. And for many people, learning happens when the certainty of one person has been transmitted into certainty for other people.
The slide that Etienne was talking to had a picture on the top of an amphitheater with one person transmitting knowledge to those people who don't know it, which is a sort of more traditional view of learning. And the second slide, the picture underneath, is a picture of, I think it's a picture of kids on a merry-go-round. And it's people in interaction with each other, like children playing on a merry-go-round, watching each other, copying each other, telling each other what to do. Nobody's teaching them.
Now? Yeah.
All right. So you've got a cartoon here, which is really when you ask us what is a community of practice, we would point you to this cartoon, which expresses what we mean by a community of practice.
And by the social learning that takes place in a community of practice. Because we have seen things called communities of practice, where in fact, this form of learning is not happening, where in fact, people have the transmission of certainty view of learning. And so for them, a community of practice is like a series of webinars where the discussion jumps from one topic to the next. So this is really what we mean by a community of practice. And we think that whether you are online or face-to-face, it is still the same idea that has to be realized, whichever platform or whichever context you're in.
So if you start from the top left, people are in the space, again, whether it's online or face-to-face, but they're in the space because they want to make a difference. And they're doing things together because they recognize that they're in a space with other people who also want to make a difference, similar to theirs or overlapping, but that other people recognize when you talk to somebody in that room, online or whatever. When I say room, it doesn't matter. Other people in that room recognize the difference that you want to make. And you enjoy being with others who recognize that difference, because unlike your family, when you tell them what you're trying to do and their eyes go into glazed mode, or your friends, with your community of practice, people know what it is that you're trying to do and know why it's important to you. And they also appreciate your uncertainty. They appreciate that it's hard, that nobody has the answer. You're working on the level where there is no answer. There is no book that says, do this, do A, B, or C. You're working on the edge of what you need, what you need to do in order to make that difference.
And it is the uncertainty about how to make the difference you get to make that is the driver of learning. And you can see how that's opposite to when the certainty of the lecturer is driving the learning. By the way, we don't mean to say that it should never happen, that a lecture should never happen. That's fine. But this is not a committee of practice. When you have a committee of practice, it's really the learning agenda, we're saying the learning edge that is driving the learning. And so in a committee of practice, engaging your uncertainty into the space, into the group, is really your gift to the community. Because that's what's going to push the group to learn together.
And out of being together and talking together and, working at that edge of your uncertainty, you get ideas and you get tools and you get tips and you get friendships and you get what some people call knowledge, but you get stuff. Right? And you take that stuff with you in your metaphorical little handbag and you take it back to your practice. And
at the fourth square, the first square of the second row.
Yeah. And you do something with it. It may be that you've now got a bit more confidence to do something. It may be that you've got a tool or a tip. But anyway, you put it to use and you see what happens as a result. You see the effect, whether or not that it works, the flowers are blooming, or it doesn't work. The flowers are dying.
Or it makes no difference.
Or it makes no difference, yeah. And
But what is key here is that effect, whether it's positive or negative, you bring it back into the group, call it a committee of practice. You bring it back to your committee of practice. So
you bring the story back, yes, of what happened.
Yeah, like, we came up with this idea, and I spoke to my manager. He didn't agree, but I convinced him, and I tried a little bit and this didn't quite work, but I tried it a little bit differently and then it worked. That whole story of what happened with the learning of the community in practice is the gift that you bring back to your community.
And so community practice is really like a loop. It's this ongoing loop over time between people coming together, engaging their uncertainty, getting ideas, putting them into practice, seeing the effect, and bringing the story back to the community. And we would say that one of the things that we have seen is that people forget the bit about bringing stories back to the community. And particularly when people go online, somehow those stories slip out of the agenda. At least in a face-to-face setting, you can talk about those stories over coffee, over tea, even if they're not included in the actual agenda of a face-to-face encounter. Okay? But those stories get lost when you're online. So just remembering that the learning in a community of practice is this loop, and you need to make sure that this loop is happening, is really our simple message.
Yeah. This is the key to leadership in a community of practice, is to ensure that that loop happens. And it could be as simple as reserving 10, 15 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to discuss, hey, who has done something with what we discussed 2 months ago and what happened, but to ensure that loop is for us the key to cultivating the community of practice, face to face or online. And so we just announced that we have written a book on facilitating communities of practice within and across organizations. It's available on our website as a download if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev and Etienne. I shared the link to the book in the chat. I will share it out with speakers or with attendees after the session. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Monica, over to you. To the floor.
Thank you. So I emailed Alex yesterday and said that I was wildly intimidated and excited to follow Bev and Etienne, and you're actually referenced in my PowerPoint on communities of practice. So it's really a pleasure to hear from you and to engage that sort of exactly the uncertainty loop. I wrote down that your uncertainty is your gift, and I find that to be really powerful and very true in my experience. So I work for an organization called the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform, and we work on a number of different topics, but I manage a portfolio called community management. So we don't necessarily call everything a community of practice, but the sort of broad engagement of communities is community management. So I'm using that framework. Community management is, and this is just my definition, the process of organizing a network of professionals around a common cause. And some of the sort of objectives and pieces that we use to engage that is relationship facilitation. It's sort of not only fostering inter-institutional collaboration and cooperation, but really building relationships among people. I think that graphic of that circle really relied on that first slide being multiple people, and that's really what community is. It's dependent on a group of people coming together. And then what do we do with that sort of knowledge exchange? And again, we have that goal of sort of promoting shared learning, which gets to the community of practice piece. So I'll just talk a little bit about the example that's probably the biggest that we've worked on, which is called the Community of Practice on Environment, Climate, Conflict, and Peace. And I have the website linked there in case you're interested in exploring this. I've worked with a lot of incredible artists over time and have some beautiful graphics. So it started in March of 2020. Some of our community is based in Geneva, but most is online. We started with 40 participants in 2020 and now have more than 500. We follow 3 tracks. The first is policy, which is shared learning and influencing of policy processes related to these topics. The second is practice, which is the true community of practice, which follows exactly that sort of limp that Etienne and Bev described. And the third is evidence, which is really sharing resources and trying to build a shared repository or evidence base of projects on environmental peace building and what happens at that intersection. We meet online regularly, and we meet in person sometimes in Geneva through different types of briefings and convenings. The community of practice doesn't necessarily have a structure beyond those 3 tracks. It's driven by participant needs and requests. And my job, actually, kind of, I guess, as Bev and Etienne said, my job is really to ensure that loop and create feedback loops where I can hear the community of practice participant needs. What are you working on? What problems are you running into? Who might it be beneficial to go into conversation with? It's that relationship facilitation side where I'm just trying to listen as much as possible and put people together so that they might create those smaller loops for shared learning, essentially. Over time, we've also developed some shared products. And you can sort of explore that Ecosystem for Peace website I won't go into detail. We've collaborated towards different policy processes like Stockholm Plus 50. We're collaborating towards COP28. We've co-written a white paper on the future of environmental peace building, which was a collaborative process of 250 people in 6 languages to write one 25-page paper. So we're definitely on the community side. So what are some of the characteristics of successful community management? And I'll kind of try to end it on this slide. I don't want to go too far over time. Something that I've found helpful over the past 3.5 years of community management is actually just getting really clear on what direction we're going in. I wouldn't even say an outlined goal because it's more of a direction of travel more than it is an actual sort of achievable, deliverable goal. But it's really clear it was really important for us to articulate what that direction of travel was, where we were trying to go as a group. We all had this common interest in these topics, and shared learning was the way of getting somewhere. But it was really helpful to sort of say, okay, we don't think that we have strong enough relationships between members. And so our direction of travel is building more relationships. That's really it. And then our secondary direction of travel was trying to mainstream environment issues into peace organizations, and then peace issues into environment organization with climate change conservation kind of mixed in there. So again, more of a direction of travel than a concrete goal. Clearly, you can put metrics on it, how many relationships exist. But for us, it felt more important to have a direction. The second thing that I think is important is actually having a community manager, having a person whose role it is to try and listen and hear where are the gaps, where might relationships be helpful. Oh, everyone is talking about the UN Environment Assembly. Should we have a conversation about this and see where we can learn forward and what projects might be helpful? I've seen some communities, be they communities of practice or just communities, sort of fizzle out without actually thoughtful management and sort of repeated management by an individual. So a community manager is really important. The next one is personal connection. Anyone who has been to a Zoom call that I've hosted knows that I tell a lot of jokes. I constantly put people into breakout rooms so that they can meet with each other and try to lean into our humanity as much as possible. This gets into the challenge of organizing an online community of practice, which is that I personally believe that our richest connection is when we feel more open, feel more sort of connected to the parts of us that we are passionate about, the parts of us that make us unique. It's tough to do online. I'm American. We're very sort of bubbly by nature. And I really tried to lean into my identity as a sort of young American woman to bring out the personal connection, telling jokes, making people feel comfortable. And I find that we actually do get kind of great results out of that, leaning into the personal connection and relationship building before we get straight into the what are your lessons learned? We ask a lot of questions about this. So why do you care about this? What's your background? Where are you from? What are you interested in? That personal side is so important. Finally, the last chunk are sort of really structural things that I found quite helpful. Having a diversity of activities, different types of briefings, convenings, writing papers together, writing blogs together, coming up with excuses and projects and ideas and programs to get people to come together. So recognizing that people have different sort of structural needs within their institutions. Some people may not be able to come to meetings, but they may be able to contribute to blogs. We do both. A regularity of activity is important. I host a monthly meeting. We had one yesterday and only 3 people came. The month before, 30 people came. It's about the consistency that keeps that feeling of a container that we all do belong to a community, no matter how active or inactive. Finally, flexibility of participation. I say to community participants all the time, I don't keep attendance. I don't know whether or not you come. The door is always open. We'd love to have you there. Whether you can participate intensively or not, it doesn't matter. I think it creates that psychological safety where people feel they can really show up. And then finally, time and flexibility of outcome just connects back to that direction of travel as opposed to a goal. Sometimes we have 3 people, sometimes we have 30 people, sometimes we achieve a goal, sometimes we don't. The goal is learning. The goal is building community, building relationships, and learning together. But I'll go ahead and leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any other questions later.
Thank you, Annika. There we popped out. Perfect. Thank you, Fiorella. I'll hand you the floor now.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it is really nice to be here. I'm honored to speak on this panel. And of course, as usual, speaking after Beth and Etienne is never easy. And also thank you, Annika, for your reflections. I will build a bit on what you have said about managing communities of practice also on the social side. So my name is Fiorella. I'm the head of operations at the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation, the CCHN. I have worked in the humanitarian field for many, many years in the Middle East and North Africa, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa. For a while as one of the Swiss government and in the private sector. But right now I'm really focusing on my job as head of operations at the CCHN, where I'm overseeing our activities and community management in all the regions, and also research and development. And I just heard that you cannot see me, but you should be able to see me now. Okay, very good. Well, I will start a bit with maybe explaining to you what the CCHN is, why it was born, and how we foster our community of practice. So the CCHN is a strategic partnership between the ICRC, WFP, UNHCR, MSF, and the objective, or the main objective really of the CCHN, is to build and foster a global community of practice of humanitarian frontline negotiators. And this is also why I'm speaking today on this. But maybe if we wind the time just a little bit back from where we see it, and also from my experience in the field, humanitarian negotiation is at the center of humanitarian action. If we fail in the negotiation, no aid will go to victims of war, nor can we deliver protection activities in a timely, efficient, and safe manner. Now, fact is that most of the humanitarian workers are not trained in negotiation. It is just assumed that they can do it. Personally, I have worked in the field for over 6 years in management positions, and I've never had a negotiation training. So as a humanitarian frontliner, you don't really talk about your lack of negotiation skills, because it's just sort of assumed that when you enter the field that you have this skill. And given that it is assumed, you would probably not ask for help if you don't have it. So the CCHN has invested a lot of time and energy in changing the mindset of humanitarian organizations to recognize that negotiation is a professional skill that can and must be learned and improved, ideally from learning from the wealth of experience that we have in the sector, whether we call it negotiation, diplomacy, or engagement. Another challenge of the sector is that humanitarian organizations and workers negotiate in silos, meaning that the authorities can very easily divide and conquer, and therefore also have a lot of leverage in a negotiation. And this is again where the CCHN comes in with its community of practice, because we foster community of practice of frontline humanitarian workers across organizations and seniority level to foster the exchange and peer learning and the sharing of experience on frontline negotiation. Now, since its inception in 2016, we have now about 5,500 humanitarian frontline workers who are part of our community of practice, and all of them have different levels of engagement, of course. People come in and go out of this community of practice in a very flux way. I will talk about this in a little while. Now, for us, the entry point in the community of practice is what we call a peer workshop on frontline humanitarian negotiation. In this peer workshop, we introduce participants to the fundamentals of negotiation tools on how to plan and execute the negotiation. But we really give them the tools to then create a space between the participants to apply the tools to their experience and share their experience with each other, and hence actually learn from each other and each other's experience. We said that the peer workshop is the entry point for the community of practice to give people a common language that then they continue their engagement on with. From the peer workshop, when they've entered the community of practice, the members can follow different learning paths. So we have the more formal learning, if you will, where they do training of facilitators so that afterward they can also organize their own peer workshops on frontline negotiation. We also have advanced workshops. But what we also really value are peer engagement activities. So for instance, we organize peer circles on different regions or different teams. All community members come together in what we call thematic groups, which are really working groups where members come together around the challenge, for instance, protection negotiations, which is something extremely challenging, where few people come together over a period of time to develop new tools or new frameworks or good practices that can be shared back to the community of practice. So some of these four are organized by us where we create a space, but what we see more and more is that community members take their own initiative and start their own working groups, their own peer circles, and so on and so forth. Now, maybe if we look a bit at the evolution, because I know the topic today is also on online community of practice or hybrid communities of practice. For the CCHN 2016, we started completely on site. So our workshops were on site and the community of practice started on site. We had to move, like most people, everything online in 2020, which honestly let our community of practice grow exponentially. Of course, we could scale the number of workshops. We could increase the number of participants that we had in our workshops, but we also could make it more accessible to local actors who would find it very, very hard to travel, not only for financial issues, but also for visa issues, sometimes just very simple logistical issues. But they can join online. We also had many more people from hard to reach areas join, for instance, from Gaza or in Northwest Syria, joining our workshops online and now replicating the model on site. What we've also noticed was moving online is the number of women and other members of underrepresented groups who have joined into the community of practice online and again now spiraling back on site. So to date, we have this hybrid community of practice. We organize our community of practice on what we call CCHN Connect. CCHN Connect, you can imagine it a bit like a Facebook of frontline negotiators. It's hosted on Mighty Networks. People can post events, they can post articles, they can connect on a chat function. For us, the online has helped us to really connect people across regions and around context and themes, but also between field and headquarters. And in a way, it helped people to tap into this enormous pool of knowledge that there is among frontline humanitarian negotiators. So just as an example, recently we had a peer circle on negotiating during natural disasters between members in Gaziantep, Myanmar, and Haiti. And there's just such an incredible learning going on if you can really compare between content. Then the on-site grounds our community, it solidifies it. So, of course, when we are on site to deliver our workshops, we meet with our community. But what is really fascinating is that we find members to meet and chat. It's becoming, in a way, for a lot of people who are part of the community, an identity. If they know there are other community members in a city, they often meet regularly on coffee shops, for instance. But also people or community members do this training of facilitators, and then they pass on knowledge. They organize their own community-led workshops. We can help them with it if they like to. But others also just really organize these workshops for their own teams, for their colleagues. Then we have community members who become mentors of other members or who run labs on different tools. And of course, some of you may know, we usually have our flagship event, which is a summit on frontline humanitarian negotiation that takes place about every 2 years, where community members really come together and gather around important topics. What we see is that the community is spiraling out of our hands, which is wonderful. Sometimes we create spaces, as I have said, or we make links between members. But on many occasions, we find members having their own initiatives and they take it forward without us actually knowing what they're working on. And we only learn about it much later. So I'm just going to give you some very few tools that the community of practice have come up with so that you can imagine this a bit. Now, for instance, we had a group of practitioners that came up with a framework that helps to evaluate the impact of compromises in a negotiation that we have then peer reviewed with community members and now is feeding back into our curriculum. Others have come together and they worked over a month on guidelines on how to negotiate with interpreters or how to interpret negotiations. And again, now we organize thematic sessions on that and feed it back to community members. There are also reflections going on how we can, for instance, support communities in negotiations. So again, we work with members and community members to develop tools on how we can support communities in their negotiations, and then they take it forward and go. Now, maybe just one last reflection. I think we found that there are very different reasons for people to join our community of practice. Some really just look for a negotiation training and the knowledge that they just cannot get otherwise. And they stop engaging afterwards or just very rarely join maybe expert sessions or something. Then others, they're really, really engaged. They enjoy building their skills. They enjoy joining workshops as facilitators. They have their own initiatives. It gives them something in addition to their jobs in the humanitarian field, which is very often, right? 24/7 doing the same things. And they enjoy having this extra space for learning that will help them in their work as well. Others are here to improve their network, where it's really about networking and getting connected to peers in context, learning from them and exchanging with them. We've also found that we have a lot of problem solvers. People come, they love to connect and create solutions to their own problems and then also own these solutions. We've also found that community members are with us because they see it as a refreshing change from the silo identity humanitarian agencies create. So now a lot of colleagues in the community of practice, they in a way identify themselves as CCHN community members, which for us, of course, it's always wonderful to hear. We've heard from colleagues that it's the way to stay sane for them in extremely isolated contexts on missions, maybe in compounds where they can connect with the outside world, with people who still share the same experience, but are not in the same location. We see people coming in and out of the community of practice depending on their availability, needs. Some are silent for 2 years and then suddenly they resurface with a great initiative because they have time in between missions. I think the bottom line really is we can't really quantify if access in the humanitarian field has gone better, but we do see that people in the community of practice engage, they come back to the community, they push with their management to be able to organize their own workshop. So we definitely feel that they do see an added value for themselves for being in this community of practice, which is wonderful to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Urella. We have Anya Paffenholz of Inclusive Peace. Today is our expert listener sort of reflection. Anya, can I hand you the floor?
Yes.
Perfect. Welcome.
Okay, good. Now I managed. I'm sorry for the light in my background. It's like you don't even want to see where I am. So I will make it really short. I was fascinated, really fascinated. I could have just keep on listening to you because I find especially also giving the framing, but then also really hearing these examples, it's super interesting. So what I have basically learned is, and heard from you is, it's all about the intentional space, giving intention to it. So an intention comes from, that's what I have heard, 2 dimensions. It comes from either because there's a bunch of people who already know that this is important. Yeah, that we want to be exchanging, we want to be a community. And that's why out of a nucleus of people, probably then the community evolves. The second I have seen is then, like we heard just on humanitarian negotiators, you can initiate that. You are an organization who sees the need in the field, but you basically see there is nothing. So why not trying to see whether you can initiate it? So that's one thing. And I think what I have also learned is you need a couple of really concrete goals, but these goals don't have to be like projectized goals. Like it doesn't have to be, this is our activity list. It's more like you start, you see the interests, and then you develop this sort of the agenda. But I think what I've also learned, it's like, what is it, what you can offer besides the exchange, the learning, but also I also like there's sometimes training, there's sometimes you do something concrete together, but some things you can leave basically to the process. It comes from the flow. And other things you can also offer, like the training we have heard in the humanitarian piece. What I also like is the aspect of solidarity, because at Inclusive Peace, we do a lot of peer exchanges also. And in the beginning, we were very stressed about this thing, like what are the expectations? How do we know that people have learned something? And how do they take this learning if there's no concrete follow-up action, because it's not like a community of practice if you do peer exchanges. And I think what we have underestimated and what people are really appreciating is the solidarity, that you know there are others. They are in the same situation like you, and they have managed that situation, or they have also not managed it like you are in the situation. And what does this do? And I think what I have also heard is that sometimes we don't know what people do with it. Sometimes we know precisely because there is a concrete action they agree. And what I have seen over the years is especially those community of practice who have also like an advocacy focus or a concrete focus, then it's often much more easy to measure. You can say, oh yes, we have done this paper and that has been included into this policy process. So I think that is easier to measure, but we should not underestimate sort of the knowledge that people are getting and how they are translating
that knowledge into their own action that might not be common action. What I think I've also heard and observed is that sometimes people just connect bilaterally or trilaterally, and you will never know. Or suddenly you just hear it at a meeting. And there are these not only friendships, but friendships of solidarity, but also very professional, sort of doing things together and asking people, oh, I have heard this person in that country is in the same situation. Let me call this person. And what I have realized also since COVID and sort of the rise of the online community of practice, that it works well on certain aspects, but it doesn't work so well on this going back and wanting to ask your new peer something, because that is also, especially in those critical situations we are all working in, and it needs a lot of trust. And usually that trust is built when you meet in person. When you were walking along the river together and you exchange, and you don't have to become friends, but you become peers, and you feel like, I trust this person. I can call this person and get some vital information that is helpful for me. And it's very hard, what I've observed, to build that only online. Yeah. So I think these are my reflections, and I'm really enjoying the discussion and looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome back to the ConnexUs Thursday Talk series. We keep joking we should have punch cards for our returnees. Thank you so much to each of our speakers for sharing your experience, your lessons learned. One of the really nice things that I find of this webinar series is that we pull from the peace building field, the humanitarian field, democracy and governance fields. And a lot of times we're sort of solving or sort of working on similar issues. So it's really great to have your reflections with us today. We have a few questions in the Q&A function to start off. And for speakers, if you want to rejoin us, a lot of these questions are pretty general to all of us. So I'll sort of put the question out there, and then whoever has thoughts to share, we can kind of go from there. Diana, do you want to go first?
Hi. So my question is about, you were explaining and sharing about the community of learning, right? I have this question about if this approach is similar to a collaborative learning approach. And if not, what is the difference between them?
Sounds like a question to the theorists to me. Etienne, do you want to take that first?
Yeah. Yes. I'm not sure what a collaborative learning approach is. Is that a learning theory, or it's the importance of collaboration? People often think that it's important for community practice for people to collaborate. But actually, more important is the edginess of working on something that you want to make a difference, that people care to make a difference. And their difference might be different. The difference I want to make might be different from yours. You don't have to collaborate with me in order to help me make a difference, but you, just by me hearing your stories, is going to help. In a lot of community practice, actually, there's a fair amount of competition. So, yeah. So, I don't think one should necessarily think that there is collaboration, as an end in itself in a community of practice.
I actually add to that. We had that as an assumption going into our community of practice, that we wanted to engender collaboration. And what it turned out was that we actually wanted to engender relationship building. You can build relationships with each other and not necessarily collaborate. We recently conducted an evaluation of the community of practice, and I can maybe, Xander, if you can send the link in the chat, that'd be great. And one of the points of feedback that we got is people actually love the community of practice because it's a place where they can talk without the pressure to collaborate. It's one of the few places where they can come and they can say, this is a problem I'm running into. How is this working? But there's actually no expectation that the two institutions will sign a memorandum of understanding or form a formal partnership. And so many of the ways that institutions talk to each other now is through formal partnerships. And they love the community because you don't have to be formal. You don't have to collaborate. You just have to talk and build relationships.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Johnson, can I go to you next?
Thank you very much. I would like to learn a little bit how you could use a community of practice to really enhance peace building, particularly at the level of communities themselves, where there are underlying differences and sometimes conflict. Thank you very much.
I'm assuming that question also maybe goes to me, but I want to hear from Tanya as well, just given the sort of peace building side of things. I'm definitely not an expert. I'll just give an example. In our practice track, we have a regular series every 2 months. We have a practitioner that comes and presents a method. I'm doing farmer managed natural regeneration for peace building in this community in Kenya. And we'll have other participants who come and may have never heard of their method, but then they kind of come into conversation with each other about, oh, well, but what about drought conditions? And what about biodiversity loss? And sort of, I think at the very sort of granular community level, a community of practice can be a way to exchange on methodologies and give you, in a way, almost an excuse to come together in conversation when you may not show conversation. All that being said, most of our members come from different communities. So I'm not as practiced in building a community of practice within a geographically uniform community.
Tanya, did you have thoughts to add on that one?
Yeah, I think the question is, how do we define community in a peace building setting? Are we talking about kind of a local community on the grassroots level? And I think that is quite challenging because very often communities of practice are already on some sort of organized expert level, like where they operate. If you talk about a community, you need at least, I would say, a person in that community that is the receiver, so to say, that can take part and has also a little bit of the space. Because if you are a community, for example, in a conflict-affected region, I mean, your space of sort of going out of this is very limited because you are helping people to survive, you are doing your activities. So how can these change makers on the local level kind of be connected? And I think that's more challenging. That's why often this goes through somebody who sits maybe on a more national level and tries to bring people together, but has this openness for opening up to that community level. So it doesn't become only an exclusive, I would say, let's call it like national level network and community of practice. And I think that's often the challenge in peace building, that the communities look quite inclusive, but they're not inclusive because people from diverse backgrounds plus people from especially rural areas are not included. And I think that takes, and then there's a language issue. Often the communities of practice are in the lingua franca. Yeah. So how do you come in if you don't speak English or French or you name it? Yeah. Or Spanish. So that is another challenge. So I think it is a way out is of having sort of those more national kind of operating networks, trying to build communities of practice like on the ground, and then people participate in the other. So you become like a channel for this, but it's more difficult. But I think it has to be done because otherwise it keeps on being exclusive, and the learning comes exclusively for those who are already in a more privileged situation. Thank you.
Thank you both. Sylvester, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, my question is like the association that has a platform for humanitarian negotiators in the front line. I think they have a good platform that connects all humanitarian, interested humanitarian frontliners from the community of practice. In the peace building world, is there an existing platform that can promote these frontline mediators or peace builders? Because I think it would be very better if we have a platform, an online platform, or if it's a platform whereby that can connect a peace builder for wherever they find themselves in the frontline peace builders, and also in different languages. Just like association had a platform for different languages and host meetings for different regions. So I think that's my question for now. If there will be a platform, I think that would be the first start. Thank you.
I'm going to ask if you can talk a bit more about your platform and then also maybe share the link for how people can get involved. And then I'm going to add on to that because I think ConnexUs might be helpful to Lester's question.
Yeah, no, sure, with pleasure. So our platform, fortunately, I cannot share the link because it's exclusive to the community of practice. So it's hosted on Mighty Networks. I don't know if you know Mighty Networks. And well, we sort of organize the community of practice long language regions, to be honest. And then, of course, there are global events. But there are spaces, for instance, in Spanish for the Spanish speakers, in French for the French speakers, English, of course, English for obvious reasons. So it's like according to languages. But what we have found is absolutely fascinating. Speaking of languages, is that, for instance, we had a committee of community members in Myanmar who have translated all our learning material into Burmese. And same thing now, that's actually the initiative of community members have translated everything into Ukrainian or into Farsi. So we're also putting this as an available space on the platform now. So that's also really interesting how the community is making an effort to have this. Then, of course, like there are the more global events that indeed a lot of them are in English, but we really encourage members, for instance, from Latin America to also organize their own sessions in Spanish. And then we see to it that there is artificial interpretation so that we can also foster this cross learning really. So that's how it is organized. Everyone can post in their own language on Mighty Networks. So as I've mentioned before, it looks a bit like Facebook, like you have a feed where you can feed what you're thinking today, you can feed your problem, and then you ask for responses. Some of our colleagues, they're now doing research or master's research, like, well, I would like to do interview on this topic, or like to connect with people on that. So that's one feature. And then we have spaces around themes that people can follow. So anything that comes in, for instance, on, I mentioned protection negotiations before, goes into one space. And then there is this chat function on it as well. What we have found, however, especially with our communities in Africa and also in Asia, is that they then start their own platform that is usually on WhatsApp. They love having their WhatsApp groups where they kind of bring in then their own knowledge. For us, of course, we encourage that. We're usually part of these WhatsApp groups as well, and we let people know what's going on. But we also try not to build too many parallel platforms because, of course, it gets also complicated to then have sort of one platform that connects them globally. But in the regions, they usually organize themselves on WhatsApp as well. So I'm not sure that answers your question.
Thank you. And I'll use... Sorry, I'm so used to everyone else sharing the screens that... There we go. So I think you're all at least a little bit familiar with ConnexUs. That's how you signed up for this event. So you've at least seen it a little bit. ConnexUs is a crowdsourced platform that works across the social impact fields, specific to the social impact fields working on conflict affected settings. Social impact, pretty wide word. Conflict affected, most everywhere is conflict affected in some way. So what I usually tell people is if you've created something that is helpful to other people in these fields, feel free to post it on ConnexUs. So that goes both for resources, say reports, videos, infographics, events, discussion forums, job opportunities, etc. And as we close, I'll share really quick a tool that I think can help complement your communities of practice or your working groups, or just if you've created something as a community of practice and want to share it with other communities, just like this discussion sort of across sectors, across fields. Everything that's posted across ConnexUs is tagged when you post it. And then they come into these thematic action areas. So here's the example of the one on youth, peace, and security, where it has some frequently asked questions, the latest resources that ConnexUs users have posted, discussion forums that people can join, coming events, etc. So we have, I believe, 25 themes right now. We recently co-created one with Inclusive Peace and a coalition on reconciliation to sort of collect reconciliation resources in one spot. So as you go back to sort of taking lessons learned from today's session, back to your communities of practice, or maybe you manage a community, if this is going to be a helpful tool, feel free to reach out to us. I'm seeing the time flash on my dashboard. with so many wonderful speakers, there's no way that we get through sort of an exhaustive discussion of this topic. But I hope that this was enough sort of to take some ideas back to your communities, to reach out to our speakers, to learn more about their work. Their bios are on the event page, and we'll share out their papers, their books, their links, all of that in the follow-up email. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much to our speakers, to Inclusive Peace for co-hosting today's session, for Alex for tracking down all of our speakers, and for our flexible and wonderful speakers for joining us. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.